Welcome to the South-South Dialogue on Sustainability. My name is Sichoy Jadi Margaret from Southwest University and Global University for Sustainability. We provide Portuguese, English, and Chinese simultaneous interpretation. You can find a group icon of interpretation at the bottom of your computer screen. We would like to thank the interpreters, Julia Ruz Di Giovanni, Melina Vavada, Huang Xiaomei, and Li Monghong. Apart from Zoom webinar, we also do live streaming on Bilibili, which is a very popular social media platform in China. There are thousands of young followers who are interested in world politics and eager to learn alternative thoughts and experience. In the past 3 years, we organized several lecture series: Venezuela in Struggles, Colonial Past, Revolutionary Legacy and Community Regeneration, Experience with Indigenous Communities in Chiapas, Cosmovision and Sustainability, African Peoples' Struggles for Liberation. All videos are recorded and uploaded to the website of Global University. Now we are organizing a new lecture series of Constructing Alternative Paradigms in Brazil. The series is co-organized by Global University for Sustainability, CCRD-CS, Lingnan University, PPGPS, Federal University of Espírito Santo, Institute for Rural Revitalization Strategy, Southwest University, and Asian Regional Exchange for New Alternatives. This lecture series by Brazilian scholars and activists will explore the construction of alternative paradigms in Brazil and Latin America. The topics include Brazilian political economy, liberation theology, participatory budgeting, liberation pedagogy, food sovereignty, agroecology, climate justice, rainforest alliance, community currency, Latin American integration, among others. On 13th of December last year, we had the first lecture, Paradigms of Food Sovereignty and Agroecology in Brazil, by João Pedro Steele from Brazil Landers Workers Movement. On 28th of February this year, we had the second lecture on Brazil in the world economy and urgent need for constructing a new paradigm. The speakers were Professor Paulo Nakatani, Professor Rogério Ferreiros from Federal University of Espírito Santo, and Professor Rosa Maria Marques from the Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo. I will type the video links of the lectures in the chat room later. Tonight, we have lecture 3, Dependency, the Agrarian Question, and Social Change in Brazil. Before the lecture, Professor Hanada Moreira would like to sing a song, Keep It Going. She will introduce the song before she sings. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Very happy to join today's session on the construction of alternative paradigms in Brazil. We would like to start with a song that conveys the spirit of the Brazilian peoples, where culture and art are overwhelmingly present. Peasant culture is embedded in this country, in this song, and it talks about a culture that is very important for us. It talks about being Brazilian and resistant to a process of colonization, a process of struggles, and also our daily struggles we all are faced with. And also, it is very much connected with everything we'll be talking about today. So this song is composed by Almir Sater, a Brazilian guitar player, and the name of the song is tocando em frente. Keep it going, and that's it. We sometimes fall, stand up, and we keep on going. So this is the very spirit of being Brazilian. I hope you will enjoy it.
Ando devagar, porque já tive pressa e levo esse sorriso, porque já chorei demais. Hoje me sinto mais forte, mais feliz, quem sabe só leva a certeza de que muito pouco eu sei, ou nada sei. Conhecer as manhas e as manhãs, o sabor das massas e das maçãs. É preciso amor para poder pulsar, é preciso paz para poder sorrir, é preciso a chuva para florir. Penso que cumprir a vida seja simplesmente compreender a marcha e tocando em frente. Como um velho boiadeiro, eu vou 20 dias. Pela longa estrada eu vou, estrada eu sou. Conhecer as manhas e as manhãs, o sabor das massas e das maçãs. É preciso amor para poder pulsar, é preciso paz para poder sorrir, é preciso a chuva para florir. Todo mundo ama um dia, todo mundo chora. Um dia a gente chega, outro vai embora. Cada um de nós compõe a sua história, cada ser carrega o dom de ser capaz de ser feliz. Conhecer as manhas e as manhãs, o sabor das massas e das maçãs. É preciso amor para poder pulsar, é preciso paz para poder sorrir, é preciso a chuva para florir. Ando devagar, porque já tive pressa e levo esse sorriso, porque já chorei demais. Cada um de nós compõe a sua história e cada ser carrega o dom de ser capaz de ser feliz.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hanada. Very beautiful. And okay, then we will start our the lecture. And let me introduce the first speaker, Dr. Camila Noreira. She got her PhD in social policy from the Federal University of Espírito Santo with a sandwich doctorate at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. She is currently coordinator of the research project, Regional Development and Economic Sustainability Alternatives for Traditional Fishing and Shellfish Communities Affected by Fundal Dam Disaster, Minas Gerais. The case of mastic production in the coastal zone of Samadels in Espírito Santo. She has publication and professional experience in economics with an emphasis on international economics, dependency theory, economic development, and social policy. She is the author of the book Contemporary Brazilian Economy, Dependency and Overexploitation, published in 2021 by Enter Capital Struggles Publishing House. So please, Dr. Camila Noreira.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone in China. Good morning to our fellows in Brazil. I would like to thank you for the invitation to be part of this session together with comrades from China and Brazil. I would like to ask if you can see my presentation on the screen before I can start. Great. So my name is Camila. I'm an economist, PhD in social policy. And as Jade explained, I have a PhD fellowship in a regional development pro, uh, uh, project funded by FAPIS and CNPq. And today, I'd like to talk about the dependence of the Brazilian contemporary economy, more specifically regarding foreign investment and transfer of value. Today, I will show some data regarding the remittance of profits, interest rates, and dividends in the Brazilian economy abroad as a way of surplus transfer during the governments of Dilma Rousseff from 2011 to 2016, Michel Temer 2016 to 2018, and Jair Bolsonaro between 2019 and 2022. I'll also present the consequences of this type of value circulation. If we take into account the vulnerability of the Brazilian economy, the fluctuations of the market, and the dependence Brazil has towards foreign capital, it's important to see what are the objectives of the foreign capital when it decides to invest in such a dependent country as Brazil. And the investment decisions per country are determined by certain peculiarities, internal peculiarity, conditions, so as to say, in their very socioeconomic structure. This is all linked with the interests and strategies of the international capital. So, our work and my presentation today is aimed at analyzing the remittance of profits, interest, and dividends from the Brazilian economy abroad is a form of transfer of surplus value during the governments I mentioned before, the governments of Dilma, Temer, and Bolsonaro. In this sense, it's important to analyze the Brazilian conjuncture and structural determining factors that shape how Brazil is inserted in the financial capitalism context. It's, it's also important to analyze the movement of capital between Brazil and the rest of the world. It's important to assess the registered made in the Brazilian payment balance sheet and other sources, such as the macroeconomic context in the country. It's also important to understand the importance of the foreign resources in the Brazilian liabilities so that we can understand these external savings, these foreign savings, this money coming from abroad. Because these determine a certain degree of dependence Brazil has today. For this reason, it's important to take into account some aspects that are derived from this dependency situation so that we can try and understand the impacts of foreign investment in Brazil, more specifically in the Brazilian economy. So First of all, we should say that the Brazilian economy is structurally constructed according to an economic development model that is a dependent one. And this situation is worsened in some administrations. So it changes from government to government. Currently, this model is made of neoliberal economic policies that were implemented in the beginning of the 90s when we began with the deregularization of our economy. In Brazil, there are certain conditions for attracting capital, such as the low pay for labor. So, manpower used in Brazil has a very low compensation. On the top of that, an abundance of raw materials and land, the very objective material conditions for attracting capital. Another important condition is our strategic position, the easy access to neighboring markets that are now under expansion, so they cannot be neglected when it comes to commercial dynamics and logistics. Brazil is very central in Latin America. This is a strategic position that is actually a very good condition for attracting capital. On the other hand, when we talk about financial globalization, Brazil has a monetary policy with high interest rates. So it is very profitable to short term capital. It is then very important to take into account the economic effort carried out by Brazil to have a position in the financial arena, being attractive for foreign investment. The internal conditions provided for the Brazilian economy have to be understood in the light of international capital, because these will shape how this movement, how these investments are going to be taken into account, such as in infrastructure or production, but it can also mean the purchase of equity, mergers, and acquisitions. So the movement, the directions of international capital is key when it comes to the decision making. Our theory framework is based on the studies of dependence Marxist theory as studied by Rui Mauro Marini, and our hypothesis is that the surplus transfer abroad is the result of how dependent countries are inserted in the world market. Based on this principle, we understand there are economic factors that are that have been established between the transfer of the surplus and the production of labor. I will now talk about foreign direct investment in Brazil. Here you can see a chart. The source is the Brazilian Central Bank and UNCTAD. Our chart starts in 2011 and ends in 2021. In green, you can see the world, and the blue refers to the Brazilian situation. This will help us understand the flow of direct foreign investment in Brazil, and the conditions are the production context in the world. So, in terms of economic growth, direct foreign investment in Brazil increases. And when we have a decrease in economy, the flow is also reduced. In the chart, you can see a diminishment of foreign investment in Brazil. Between 2011 and 2014, we have a decrease and then it keeps up again as of 2015. And this recovery translates into an increase of 47% between 2014 and 2014 in the flow of direct foreign investment, so productive investment. And this is mainly a result of mergers and acquisitions that took place in the time, increasing by 61% between companies of different countries. So this is the source is UNCTAD. What we can see is that as of 2017, the flow the flow degrows. And in 2020, the year of the pandemic, we have 20% lower investment. Also, if we compare it with the subprime crisis in 2019. We can see the perspective of recession that leads multinationals to review their projects. So as you can see, we have different results in underdeveloped countries as Brazil and more central economies. So in there, you can see something clear that shows the high degree of vulnerability and dependence of countries such as Brazil. And overall, when it comes to international flow of capital, Brazil is in a highlighted position as a beneficiary of foreign investment because of the conditions I presented before. In 2019, Brazil was in the third place for receiving foreign investment. 2011, 2020, the fourth position, which is not a bad position. In 2011, so the first year of Dilma's administration, we had 10 million invested, and you can see this in the chart. And as of 2012, it goes down, and we have a recovery in 20, somehow in 17 we have about 6.8 million US dollars, and then we can see peculiarities. For instance, during Bolsonaro administration, the average flow was 5 million, and in 2019, because of this fluctuation, Brazil occupied the
Excuse me.
sixth position as a beneficiary.
Well, these outcomes show that internal aspects of the Brazilian economy are fundamental for attracting capital. So we can say that there are some aspects related to the variations in policies, pol- economic, economic instability, degrees of variation, as we see in 2016, 2016, when um, President Dilma was impeached, and we consider that to have been a coup. The, the international capital is very reactive to that fact, and there is a lack of stability of the policies, and that results in a retraction of those capital. Michel Temer's administration will not be able to manage that, and Bolsonaro's administration has deepened that instability in the midst of a pandemic and an economy based in very low investment. And despite of the very neoliberal agenda of the Bolsonaro administration that could attract uh, capital investment, the risk um, was so high that there was a decrease of the entry of foreign capital in the country. So, in that way, what do we need to analyze? We need to see what is the composition of foreign direct investment. So, this is we have this is data from the central bank in Brazil. In orange, we see the participation of capital, and in gray, we see the loans between different companies. And this is the result in terms of direct foreign investment. So this is the composition of that foreign investment in Brazil. So there is a part of operation between different companies and the shares participation. So this operation can be loans from one branch to the other, while the investments in terms of participation of capital are related to acquisitions and mergers that will increase the inventory of the different companies. So what we see as a series is that there is a decrease of the participation in terms of acquisitions and mergers. For Bolsonaro's administrations, we do not see an increase. And in 2019, in the first year of the Bolsonaro administration, the participation of foreign capital has increased. So there is an increase in mergers and acquisitions because of the policy of privatization that the Bolsonaro administration had been um, pushing forward. So we see that transportation companies associated to Petrobras, the national oil company, and other companies in that sector. So the Bolsonaro policy was the privatization of the state-owned companies, and there was a 36% rate of privatization in that period, especially in strategic sectors. For us, that is an evidence of an increment of the dependency of the Brazilian economy in terms of the dependency of the buying of fuels. What we see is that the acquisitions and mergers will um, augment the relation of dependency of the Brazilian economy. And what we see is also that there is an expansion of the loans between different corporations. You see here there was an increase of 128% between 2011 and 2021 because there's more flexibility for the corporations when they do that. That has been increased in the Brazilian economy, that form of transaction, that form of circulation of capital, because that also allows them to avoid certain legal restraints, and that has been happening a lot, and that is very easy to see in the data we are bringing here. So if we understand what is the flow of investment in terms of the real production of this economy, also the information comes from the Brazilian Central Bank, so the percentage of direct foreign investment compared to the GDP. So over history, the participation of foreign direct investment in relation to the GDP has been increasing over 20%, around 20% of the Brazilian GDP is being generated by direct foreign investment. And what we see here is that in 2016, that represented 31% of the GDP, 2019, 37%, 2022, 41%. So that shows the dependency of Brazil regarding that form of investment. That shows how dependent the Brazilian economy is on that entry of direct foreign investment. Considering the direct economic effect of the foreign investment, a central element of our thesis here is the remittance of interest and dividends. And what we see here is that remittances have been decreasing during Dilma Rousseff and Michel Temer's administration, and had a rebound during Bolsonaro's administration. That is the amount sent to foreign markets. Also during the pandemic, the amount of remittances was about 29 million US dollars. So this was a very important characteristic of Bolsonaro's government. So let's see another form of foreign investment, the portfolio investment, or everything that relates to short-term capital. That has a very different logic um, if we compare it to foreign direct investments. So the, the institutional elements such as the market growth and the functionality of the institutions here, there's a different role of those elements. And that shows that there's more volatility of the Brazilian economy in terms of the entry of the foreign capital. Here, liabilities and assets, we see that it is very intense and the negotiation of this assets is very high during Dilma's government, and also there's a decrease during Temer and Bolsonaro administrations, but these are assets created by public debt bonds, revealing a process of economic dependency. We also can see here a different behavior if we look at 2015, and then you see a decrease, and then you see an increment of a different modality of investment, which is the derivatives. They are going to go up from 2011 to 2021. And here, people, we see actually the remittances of interest and dividends, the bonds that have been negotiated in the international or domestic market, and what has been remitted. So we could highlight 2011, 10 million interest and dividends. Then that amount will decrease and then go up again in 2021. A very important thing I want to call your attention on here is that Brazil is offering a guarantee of a very high interest rate. The Selic rate has been around 17% over time, 18%. During Dilma's government, it falls to 14%. And then recently, the Bolsonaro administration has it went up again. So this is a very important factor of for attracting capital, and so that will also increment the amount of the remittances. Then now, moving closer to the end of my presentation, I have been working on my PhD thesis on an indicator together with Professor Paulo and other researchers, how to calculate the percentage of goods. So this is the percentage of the GDP that has been remitted to foreign markets and the form of interest and dividends. So we see here in terms of profit of interest and dividends. So this shows how much of the wealth that is produced in Brazil through the exploitation of labor and land.
Excuse me, Camila, could you speak slowly? Yeah.
Isso ali
And
seria a relação com o PIB. Então,
here we see the relation to the GDP. Now we see the relation to the exportation of goods. So this is the percentage of the export of goods sent abroad compared to the amount. This is also an indicator, right? Compared to the form. So this is the how much of the investment has been remitted compared to the total amount of the goods that have been sent abroad. So this percentage will reach 28 or 27%, and then it will fall a little bit in the following year. What does this mean? That everything we are exporting as primary goods, uh, everything that we receive, around 28% of what has been sent abroad is going to be remitted under the form of interest and dividends that is being paid back to foreign capital. So this is also other indicators regarding how much foreign capital is being earned. So between 2011 and 2021, 10% of the exports were being sent abroad under the form of interest and dividends. So, of all the exports, this we see how much revenue is being generated and how much of it is sent abroad. On the B chart, we see how the amount of the revenue from interest and negotiated bonds. So this is how much has been sent out in the form of interest. So I thank you for the opportunity of bringing this data. I'm already working on them. We are updating my thesis in order to show the importance of our investment under different forms, to show how much the form, the insertion of Brazil in the international market is actually incrementing, augmenting the dependency of the country's economy, because there is this appropriation, this foreign appropriation of the wealth that is being produced in the country. And something we can go back to during the debate, how much the country is vulnerable because of this dependency. So, as the country is highly dependent on this type of resource. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Camila. You mentioned analyze the problem of dependency in Brazil, and next speaker is Professor Hanada Moreira. She's from Department of Economics at the Federal University of Espírito Santo. She obtained her PhD in Applied Economics from the Federal University of Wisconsin in 2009. She has been working in the areas of applied economics, socio-economic development, and social policy, with an emphasis on popular education in the landless workers movement, agrarian question, and gender relations. The floor is yours. Hanada, please.
So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be part of these sessions on Brazil. I work with a very central area for us in Brazil, namely understanding the land-related issues and seeing land as a structural factor of capital in Brazil. So that's the scope of my presentation today. I can't go to the next slide. I'm going to change the presentation mode so I can go to the next slide. Anyway, so Brazil is a continental size country. We have large pieces of land
uma questão muito central em torno da terra.
and we have several
Então, trazendo um
issues
pouco dessa
regarding
questão
the
da
land.
terra
So that's what I
no
wanted
Brasil, para
what I
mostrar para
wanted to talk
vocês
about
como
today,
esse
land and
movimento
power
por
in Brazil,
trás
so that you can
de um
understand
modelo de
Camila's
desenvolvimento desses
presentation
povos tem
through
como
the
estrutura
perspective of
central
a
essa
dependently,
terra.
economically
Como que essa
dependent
terra
economy.
então é isso, né?
So,
Essa
as
relação
I
de
was saying,
dependência
we have this
e todo esse
de-
processo
relation of
histórico de
dependence,
inserção do
and we
Brasil
have a
no
historical
mercado mundial
process through which
capitalista,
Brazil is
como que
part
isso vai
of the
aparecer nessa
capitalist
história,
world
assim
market.
quanto
So,
estruturante
what is
dessas
the
relações de
impact
dependência que a
of
Camila nos
this
apresentou,
position in
né? Então, esse
land-related
processo de
issues?
concentração de
We have
povos no
a
Brasil
concentration of land
desde a
in
história
Brazil.
da nossa
Historically,
colonização
it
a partir da
starts with the
Europa,
colonization,
nesse processo de incorporação e expansão de mercados
and
ao
it's a
mercado
process of
mundial,
incorporation and
que se
expansion of
desenvolveu
markets and the inclusion of the Brazilian economy
durante o século
in this
XVI,
international
num
global market
processo de
under
acumulação
expansion in the
primitiva,
16th
onde
century
os nossos
through a process of
povos
primitive
foram
accumulation. So our
colonizados, foram
indigenous peoples
exportados, muitas
have been
riquezas
colonized,
extraídas daqui para a
exterminated,
Europa
and
para a
lots of
gente
resources
fazer
have
as
been taken
revoluções
from
industriais.
our country so that
Então, o
Europe
Brasil se
could carry out
insere
its
já
industrial
nesse
revolution.
mercado mundial a partir
So
desse
Brazil
processo histórico de
enters
colonização,
the world market
onde
through
essas terras elas são
colonization,
primeiro
and the Brazilian
apropriadas
land
pela coroa
are at the
portuguesa
first moment
e a partir de
appropriated by the Portuguese
1850,
crown,
vendo
and from
todas as questões
1850
de expansão de um
on,
mercado mundial
due to
e crises
pressures
do
of a
capitalismo
global
mundial,
market under expansion
no
and the
Brasil vai ser
global
determinado
capitalism
em
crisis. Here in
1850 a
Brazil,
lei
in
de
year
terras, que a
1850,
gente
we
marca aí
enacted
como o
the law
nascimento do
of lands.
latifúndio e da
We usually
propriedade
say
privada
this
no
is
mundo. Então, até então,
the
a
year
propriedade
we
era da
have the
coroa
beginning
portuguesa.
of
Mas a
large
partir de
land holdings in
1850,
Brazil and
essas terras
private
da coroa são
property in Brazil.
possíveis de serem compradas
Before this year, before
pelo
this land,
estrangeiro. Então,
this
a
legislation, land
colonização
was
colonial
property
vinha no
of
sentido
the
de
Portuguese crown. As
concentrar
of
e
1850,
manter
it's
essas
possible
terras
to acquire
concentradas
and to
nas mãos
concentrate
apenas de quem
the
poderia
land in the
comprá-las.
hands of the very few people
Isso é um
who
processo
could
também histórico
purchase
que
it
vai
and pay for
aparecer
this
porque
land.
a grilagem
This
de terras,
and this is
porque
not the
as
only
terras
way to appropriate land. We also
da
have land
maioria
grabbing in Brazil, which means that through
indígenas
violence,
cismarinhas
invasion,
e de pessoas que vêm em
we
torno de
have
ocupar essas terras,
the occupation
passam
of
a
land in Brazil,
declarar
and
essas
the
terras
occupiers
antes
of
e a
land
partir disso
declare
comprava da coroa
property
como se
of these
estivesse
land.
ocupando terras
So
que na
these
verdade
occupiers
eram
who
povos originários
who
históricamente
actually
que ocupavam.
dispossessed indigenous
Mas,
people, they
ao mesmo
become the
tempo, de uma
landowners.
lei de terras de se autodeclarar
Because
esses
with the
povos
land
como
of
terras
law
infrágeis
enacted
fazer
in
aquisição dessas
1850,
terras.
occupiers
Então,
have
todo
the
esse
right
dado
to declare
histórico
the
vai
land they
aparecer
occupy
até
as being
hoje
their
na
own
atualidade
property.
brasileira.
And in a
Eu
certain
acho
way,
que
we have the
independente
same
do
going on in
fato
Brazil
que até hoje
today.
seja um país
So
com
until
tanta
today,
terra
we are a
sem
country
gente,
with
e eu
vast
vou mostrar um pouco
pieces
para
of
vocês
land
como é que está
without
ocupado os nossos
people, and I'm
povos,
going to show
e ao
you
mesmo
this
tempo,
in a
na
while.
verdade, com muita
And on
gente
the other hand,
sem
we
terra.
have so many people
Então, o nosso
without any
processo
land.
de colonização ele vem com
The
essa
Brazilian colonization
escravidão do
process
primeiros
includes
colonizados,
the
depois
slavery
escravos que
of
ficam trazidos da
indigenous
África,
people, and at a later
e
stage,
no momento
slaves
da
from the
libertação
African
da
continent.
escravidão, a
And
terra
when at
passa a
the
ser
end of
de
slavery,
propriedade privada.
land
E aí
becomes
surge o
private
latifúndio
property,
e a
and then
venda
we
de
have the
terras
rise
aí.
of large land
Então, eu
holdings
queria compartilhar aqui com
and the
vocês
concentration of land
um
in Brazil.
pouco de como que isso vem aparecer
In this
hoje,
sense,
essa
um,
concentração de
I would like
terras e
to
poder
bring this process
efetivando
to
esse
the present.
modelo de
How does the
desenvolvimento
concentration of
brasileiro,
land is a
onde isso
structural
vai
part
trazer
of
a
our
exportação de
economically
bens
dependent
primários
model?
e de
an economic model based on the export of primary products and the purchase of industrialized processes. So we do not develop an internal market in Brazil. And here you have some data from the census carried out in 2017. And here you can see the total area of arable land in Brazil. The Brazilian territory spans to 150 million hectares. 1 hectare, it corresponds to 10,000 square meters, so that you can have an idea. So the total arable area in Brazil is spans to 350 million hectares, divided in 5 million agribusiness lands. This allows us to see the level of concentration and how this territory expanded as of 1850. So in Brazil, in 1960, 1970s, we had a debate about the agrarian reform, the land reform, in the context of capitalism development in Brazil. And here you can see how dependent we are. In Brazil, we haven't carried out a land reform the way we had in China or in the United States. We actually had a process that usually called conservative modernization of agriculture. As a consequence, we have larger portions of agriculture, but the land is concentrated in large land holdings. A large land holding size varies from one region to another, but we would say property with 500 hectares and more. So the 351 million of hectares is an area that is quite similar to arable land in China. And these 350 million are distributed according to the use. So in terms of culture, we have grains for export, but also food culture. Let's say for permanent cultures, we have 7.75 million hectares and temporary land, 55 million hectares. And most of it produces soy, bean, corn, and sugarcane. There are basically commodities for export that are not internally used in Brazil. As to ranching, if we put it together, natural ranching and artificial ranching, we have more than 150 million. So almost 40% of the agriculture land is pasture in Brazil. Is for cattle raising. We have an extensive model of cattle raising in Brazil that is made for export, and we have, in average, one beef per hectare. So in 10,000 square meters, we have only one beef. This is to give you a picture of the degree of land concentration and how do ranches underuse the land, have their lands underused. There is no lack of land, but land means power. On the top of that, we have nature, natural nature, and planted nature. As to planted forests, we have eucalyptus, which is what we call a green desert, because you have industries, the multinational sector that plant eucalyptus that they can produce pulp paste that is then exported. Also in Brazil, several pieces of land are used for pulp production. At present, Suzano is a multinational company that was part of this process of acquisition explained by Camila in her presentation. And today, in the state of Espírito Santo, Bahia, and Minas Gerais, this company has several conflicts with the peasant community and with the landless community. So you can understand how these are distributed in our territories. In Brazil, we have more than 200 million inhabitants and only 15 million uh, work in agriculture. And also the automation, the mechanization per establishment. You can see 740,000 uh, machine, but this is an average because the distribution is very unequal, as you will see in the next slide.
Não está aparecendo para mim. Para vocês foi? Para vocês está aparecendo?
Então, ainda está na tabela 2.
Enquanto a Maísa vai passando aí, eu vou fazendo uma síntese. Então, as lavouras ocupam.
I'll summarize. So, culture is spent to 63 million hectares, which is 80% of the land used for grain and food production. Only 8%. 45% correspond to pasture, and here you can see the expansion of the agricultural land in the past 10 years. It increased by 21 million hectares. As to the number of properties, it reduced from 5 million 75,000 to 5 million 73,000. And the average area increased from 63.75 hectares to 69.24 hectares. But when you see the size of each property, this average is not representative because only 1% of arable land are in agricultural properties spanning to up to 100 hectares, meaning 90% of the total. So 58% of agriculture land are concentrated in properties spanning over 500 hectares in Brazil. When you think about agriculture, family agriculture, and other type of agriculture, it corresponds to more than 45% of total properties in Brazil that concentrate less than 3% of land. On the other hand, 21% of land are properties spanning to 100 hectares to more, and less than 77% of properties. And 58% of Brazilian land, of agricultural Brazilian land, are in properties spanning over 500 hectares that correspond to less than 3% of total. If we see only the ranches spanning over 1,000 hectares that are less than 1% of properties, it concentrates 48% of agricultural land in Brazil. So currently, these large land holdings, they are they pertain to big oligopolies, international oligopolies, and they practice agribusiness. And this production package based on monoculture, intensive use of agriculture technique, including machinery and pesticides, on the top of a large concentration of a production that is intended for the export of primary products. You can see a chart that displays the use of pesticides in Brazil. So monoculture uses a lot of water. And as a consequence, we have an environmental degradation, which puts our country in a position of vulnerability. And also, it leads us to face an environmental crisis that is actually triggered by the agribusiness exporting model. As of year 2000, you have the annual patents that are released in Brazil for pesticides. So many pesticides that are used and sold in Brazil are banned in Europe and in other countries because there is a proven negative impact on human health. So you see, 2016, the year of the coup against the President Dilma, when Temer took office, you can see a huge increase in the number of pesticides authorized every year. As you can see, the coup that took place in Brazil is also connected with the pressures from these ranchers that have power and influence in the Brazilian parliament. Almost half of MPs in Brazil are connected with these ranchers. So the Brazilian democracy is a democracy, but our political system is shaped in a way that allows these electoral groups that benefit certain powers and interests. So we have a democratic system, but we are not able to renew and change the composition of the parliament because there is lots of funding made by multinationals and ranchers to these MPs and also investment funds actually, because we have a financial capital operating in Brazil, and we have this connection between three capitals: banking capital, agricultural capital, productive capital, and industrial capital. How they intertwine in a single movement that appropriates our land and all resources included in our land, and our natural resources, minerals, water, so on and so forth.
Então, aí vai mostrar como que
So,
e também, né, nesse movimento de apropriação de terras vem
also in this movement of the
a crise
appropriation of
do
land
capital internacional. Então, a partir de
goes the crisis
2010,
of international capital.
expandindo no
So since
Brasil,
2010,
e
that has been
com
expanded in
isso
Brazil.
traz também a questão
And that
social
brings
que está
also
embutida dentro dessa
social
crise do
issues that are
capitalismo, que é uma crise
part of
social
this
e
crisis
uma
of
crise ambiental
capitalism, which
também.
is also a
E
social
desse
and
total de
environmental crisis.
estabelecimento,
So,
17%
in the total
não possuem energia
of the
elétrica e
agricultural
23%
establishment,
desses micro proprietários
70% do not have
declaram
access
como
to
produtores analfabetos.
electric energy,
Então, a
and
gente tem um aumento da
23%
população economicamente
of the
ativa
owners
desempregada
are not
e um
literate.
êxodo rural que
So we have
continua
a
bastante
very
grande
high
no país.
part, a very,
Então, lá
very
mostrou
broad
para a
part
gente a
of the
redução
labor
de
force that is
1,5 milhões de postos de trabalho, que
unemployed,
são
and
pessoas que
there is a
saíram do
very
campo e que
important
migraram
exodus from
para
rural
as
to urban
cidades.
areas.
E um aprofundamento da dependência
And there's a
estrutural de uma
deepening
economia
of the
primária
structural
exportadora, onde
dependency
concentra
of an
mais
economy that
terra,
is
num
primarily
modelo que não gera
towards
empregos
exportation,
e que é
concentrated in a model
ambientalmente
that is not generating
destrutivo, com
any
expoliação de
employment, any
recursos naturais que
occupation,
vão sendo todos
based
orientados
on
para o capital
monoculture
internacional,
and
combinando o
the
latifúndio, a
use
monocultura,
of
a
natural
depredação dos
resources,
recursos
the
naturais
predatory use of
e o
natural
aumento
resources,
da
the, sub, uh,
superexploração da nossa classe trabalhadora.
the
Isso são
overexploitation
elementos
of
que
the
vão
working class.
fundamentar
These
todo esse
are the
modelo de desenvolvimento
fundamental,
dependente.
the
Próxima, por favor,
pillars
Maísa.
of
Vou
our
acelerar um pouco aqui, porque as
dependent
travações fez com que a gente
development.
extrapolasse um
So
pouco esse
next
tempo
slide,
aí.
please. I know I am running
Aqui
late.
traz um pouco de imagens
So
mostrando
these
esse
are some
modelo, né, de
images
aplicação
of
do
this model.
latifúndio, da
The
monocultura,
model of
como que esse
what
trabalhador
is
que trabalha com
monoculture
agrotóxicos, que é
and large
altamente
properties
prejudicial à
in the
saúde, sem
rural
nenhuma
areas. Here they're
segurança.
using
Hoje essa aplicação já
agrochemicals
é
with
aérea, a
without any
drones,
protection.
e isso
Today, it's
pulveriza
also made through
inclusive
using drones, and they will they will apply over the villages where the people live. That is true for eucalyptus, for sugarcane crops, and the pollution by agrochemicals comes also with the overexploitation of the labor force and people working under enslavement conditions. This is very important to understand what is the movement of our working class. Please, Maísa, we can move on to the next slide. And so here, how this also takes the form of foreign direct investment for buying land in Brazil. So in 2017, Michel Temer will approve a new land bill opening the path for more land grabbing, and the administrations have been allowing the purchasing of land in the country by foreign investors. So there is a cooperation between internal domestic dominant classes, imperialist countries, and large transnational corporations. So here we see a crisis of the capital and international financial system, bringing land to be again a very safe, very secure investment. So this is, as a result, have an increase, a rebound of the price of land. So they will buy land and make profits from that, and also make profit from practically the enslavement of the local population, because there is no need for an internal market to fulfill their profits that will come from the foreign market. So land becomes an important source of secure investment. That is the way of appropriating the surplus value produced in that land, the products of that land, and also the speculation over that land in foreign markets. So in Brazil, INCRA, the National Institute of Colonization and Agrarian Reform, will be the agency responsible for controlling the ownership of the land, and they have seen that 2.9 million hectares were owned by foreign companies. But we know that's more than that. When you go to NGOs like GRAIN, that is also measuring that around the world, they have a number of 2.9 million hectares acquired by foreign companies in Brazil. So this is actually the concrete face of financial globalization. We have a connection between investment, the pension funds, the control of the land by agribusiness. 65% of all the land that's being bought in Brazil was bought by agribusiness. So it's not separate. 31% was purchased by the financial sector. This is what we call capital finances. So it's not only about financial funds or the banks. This is seen, this is present in this combination that we see. This is the mergers and acquisitions. And then in the parliament, we are going to see the dispute over public resources and policies with the rural areas working class, and that would be blocking any type of agrarian reform or family agriculture oriented policies. So this is for us to see the number of corporations, foreign capital companies present in Brazil. And we see that by country, this is 40 companies from the United States that are presently exploiting natural resources in Brazil. 26% are Brazilian companies, which also have the participation of foreign investors. This is also a way for them to buy land when there's some businessman, Brazilian businessman or uh, businessman families that are buying land, but it's actually foreign investors. 14 from Japan, 13 from the United Kingdom, for you to still see how much of that is also concentrated in the United States and how that is an expression of financial globalization. I bring here the example of Cosan, the third agriculture company in Brazil with a value of 39 billion reais. So 1 real is about 5.2 reais. So their revenue was in 2015 about 292 million reais, for you to have an idea. And they have been buying 424,000 hectares in 2012 through Fundo Radar, a financial fund that is the owner of 90% of Cosan's shares. So they're able to buy land for soy and orange crops through the conglomerate called Mancia, also from the United States. So this is a way of disguising the fact that this land is being bought and will be under the control of foreign companies. Just as the way that there's many masks, there's many disguises for us not to see through the data that that is an appropriation of our territory. So let's move forward, please, to the next slide. In here we see that the number of properties owned by agribusiness companies for foreign capital uh, agribusiness companies. Here we see them by the type of the crop. And we have here a very important number for the monoculture of trees, that in Brazil is mainly eucalyptus, what we call the green desert areas. So the exportation of cellulose paste or pulp that is dry, extracting water from the land, and none of that will be paid. So then we have grains and rotation crops, soy, corn, sugarcane comes in the third place, and the land market itself in the fourth position. So how does that translate into dependency? 44% of Brazilian exports, and we know that historically, is concentrated in only 7 sectors of agribusiness. So it's about more than $65 billion around that are being concentrated in soy, oil, mining, cellulose, space, corn, coffee, and sugarcane. So this is an expression of the dependency of Brazil also in agriculture. So this is an image of what does that mean? What is this territory that is occupied by the monoculture of trees, eucalyptus trees? This is completely mechanized. This is not generating jobs. And these were once territories of indigenous people, of small farmers and peasants that were taken by companies, and also public lands that have been given by different administrations to attract foreign capital to our country, for us to have an idea of how immense is the size of the territory and how much these territories are being destroyed under the dispute between different foreign groups with no respect to the Brazilian population that is becoming landless. And obviously, the Brazilian population is resisting. So these are numbers about the conflicts in rural areas in Brazil. This is uh, the numbers of events, of conflict events, and we see how that number goes up during the Bolsonaro administration when we found this fascist characteristic of promoting and campaigning for the death of all the people that are defending their land and their traditional territories, such as the landless movement, the indigenous people, the rural community. So we see up to 2054 events of conflict in 2020. So the next slide, please. I'm not seeing it yet. Oh, there it is. So this is also bringing the omission and the impunity that historically has been seen in the country. So the families of the great landowners, they have people of the family in the police and others in the church. So during that has been an historical reality, but during the Bolsonaro administration, that the culture of violence in rural areas will also be promoted, stimulated, so that the events of conflict have been growing. And on the other hand, there is an increase on the number of families affected by land grabbing. So that number has more than doubled, about 102.85% higher. And a very important part of these communities are indigenous communities who had their territories invaded. So the number of families who have their territories invaded has also more than doubled. If we compare the year 2019 to 2020, like during the Bolsonaro administration, this picture shows um, an attempt to expel a camp occupied by families, and then the police came in, riot police. So you see that there are the families, the women, children, 8 people, and they destroyed the camp school that had been built. So they had that had a great impact for those families. So the events of conflict have also changed region. So most of them happened in Pará, Bahia, Minas Gerais, also territories where the mining activities are very present. And what cases do we see? Death threat. And we also have an increase of the number of murders of leaders, murder attempts, and torture. We had 13 cases of torture. These are numbers of the year 2021, and the numbers are from the researchers of Comissão Pastoral da Terra. Of those conflicts, we see that they go around water, land, and labor rights. And we have also seen 3 murders of Yanomami people, people being threatened by miners, mining activities that will also pollute the water. As a result, people do not have access to water, and also the proliferation of diseases under a context of the people not having any kind of healthcare provided by the administration. So finally, to wrap up my presentation, I would like to show the struggle of our people for food sovereignty and over the right to land. So after 2016, we do not have any more the question about family farming and agribusiness have been distinguished in the census, but we know that family agriculture will provide more jobs than agrobusiness. It will produce about 70% of the food in a country. If you see yuca or manioc, that is going to be up to 80%. As we see here, agribusiness production is oriented to export. The global production of family farming in Brazil is about 40% of the agriculture GDP of the country, although it occupies less than 20% of the land and has very little of the credit of the financial programs, investment programs by the administrations from public funds. So the little land that uses is not reflected in how much food they produce and how much the jobs and income they provide to the families in rural areas. So this also shows the structure of our dependency. So please, Maisa, the next slide. So these are some elements for us to understand this movement and why do we believe today that from our point of view, agribusiness is the very expression of financial capital in a broad understanding of what is the financial globalization as shown by Chenet. And in Brazil, and finally to thank you, I would like to show our alternative proposal, which is agroecology, family farming, and food sovereignty in our territories. And now Maisa will go on talking about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hanada. You explain the problem of land concentration and also the land conflicts in Brazil. Thank you very much. And our last speaker is Maisa Amara. She is pursuing her PhD in social policy at the Federal University of Espírito Santo. Since December of 2022, she has joined the exchange program with Lingnan University, Hong Kong, China. She also helps organizing the Brazil lecture series. Thank you very much. Please.
Bom dia, boa noite a todos e todas.
Good morning, good evening, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. It is an honor to be sharing this panel with Camila and Renata to approach such an important topic. We have a series of lectures that to try to put some light on the conditions in Brazil and the construction of alternatives, which is very important, in my opinion. It's important to illustrate and to talk about the alternatives that we have in Brazil and our struggles. And I'd like to call your attention to this. This is the topic of my presentation today. I'll be talking about the experience of women peasantry at the landless movement and the construction of alternatives, which is in line with what Renata mentioned, the history of land-related issues, concentration of land, production of food in Brazil, and our agrarian context in Brazil, and in the case of family farming that produces healthy food, but you also have an absence of enough healthy food, the expulsion of people from their lands. And so, as you can see, the title is The Experience of Female Peasantry at the Landless Movement in the Construction of Alternatives. We had another lecture made by João Pedro Stedley. He explained about MST, which is a social movement in Brazil of landless rural workers that fights for land distribution in Brazil and agrarian reform, because we don't have an agrarian reform in Brazil as of the beginning of the Brazilian history as a colony and later on as a dependent country. We have actually a history of land concentration as mentioned by Renata. So throughout the Brazilian history, we've had several movements that fought for land distribution, and as mentioned, we have huge pieces of land without any people and a huge amount of people without any access to land. So this is what triggers the creation of the landless movement. And today I'll be talking about the experience of women in the construction of alternatives. First of all, let me show you some data, some figures regarding labor and women in rural areas. On the one hand, we have huge concentration of land and difficult conditions for agricultural workers when it comes to distribution, subsidies for production, because we have incentives for production, but for mechanized production, highly mechanized agribusiness, but very few incentives for family farming and family agriculture. And we also have a female component, the role played by women. According to data by the ILO, women are 40% of agricultural manpower in developing countries, so almost 50%. We should also say that women start working very early and at early stage at home, so taking care of the households with small groceries and also taking care of kids, so on and so forth. And this type of work is usually invisible. Quite often, this is not considered as work, but as a role. A role.
Enfim, a gente tem trabalho que é altamente invisibilizado.
Women's work is made invisible in many countries, and I have some data. According to the ILO, 40% of agricultural labor in developing countries is composed of women. When we compare this to official data from the census as of 2017, of all properties assessed by the census, we see a male predominancy, as you can see in this chart. And then you can think of, we have the gender of the producer. So the question is, do women identify as women when interviewed, or is there a bias in the census? Anyway, as you can see, we had a difference between the census carried out in 2006 and 2017. More women identified themselves as producers, but here in orange, you can see that only 18.7% of labor is identified as feminine. And we know that women are actually directly connected with food production, with the agrarian reform. However, the data does not reflect this. Another change was registered in the census. For the first time, the survey included an unprecedented data, which is the administration of the property made by the couple. So 20% of agricultural properties are administered by the couple. And it's the first time we have such type of information, but this figure is considered as low. Here you can also find family farming data and non-family farming data, differentiating what is considered as family farming and what is not considered as family farming. Family farming is considered by IBGE, the Development Institute, as being agricultural properties that can be in continuous land or not, but the main labor is the family labor with punctual and seasonal hiring of third parties, but where most of the revenue, most of, how can I say, most of the profit derives from the sale of their family production. You can see when it comes to non-family farming, we have 15.23% of women as producers, whereas in family farming, the figure is a bit higher, but the figures are still concerning because only 19%. With regards to access to land, in a country as Brazil, with very specific and peculiar working conditions, the land is fundamental to guarantee the production. When it comes to women, it's not only the guarantee of production, but also independence, autonomy, because it increases the access to credit for production. According to data from the FAO that assessed several countries in Latin America and the Caribbean in 2017, women own less than 20% of agricultural properties in the region. Another alarming figure. In Brazil, it is only after the federal constitution as of 1988 that women were able to have the right to acquire land, to own land. And only in the beginning of the 2000s, women have earned the right to have their names on the certificate of property together with their husbands, because prior to that, only the name of the man was included in the certificate of property, and in case the couple divorced, women were left with nothing, despite the fact they would have worked with their husbands and maybe worked more than their husbands in the production, in the planting. They were not allowed to have their names in the certificate of property of land that was distributed up after this agrarian reform. But after years 2000, the beginning of 2000, women have their names on the certificate of property, so they have a proof, and in case of a divorce, these women have the right to remain with a portion of the land. They are not left with nothing. And according to the data from the census, 19.7% of women doing family agriculture and 50.2% of women in non-family agriculture have access to land as landowners. These figures are alarming. But in parallel to that, we've been striving to build alternatives. And we have some milestones from the previous years that are the result of a lot of struggle, a struggle for the recognition and acknowledgement of their work and importance. So if you allow me, I'd like to briefly talk about the construction of alternatives and the possibilities of new paths. First of all, as of the beginning of the process of occupation of land and fight for the land, women have always been fighting together with their husbands. But when it came to production, women had less room, less space when it came to decision making. And throughout the years, women reacted, and in the context of the MST movement, women created a specific sector, a female sector for women, which was an achievement. And we also had a difference in the participation of women that now are more present in the direction of the movement in decision-making roles. So it's part of the movement's policy that women occupy 50% of the position. So in the administration, usually you have one man, one woman. On the top of that, you have the self-organization collective groups. These groups are a policy for the movement. Within these groups, we discuss the participation of women, the importance of women, the contributions of women. On the top of that, you have women in relevant roles in the production. And currently, we have hundreds of MST cooperatives where women are at the direction, at decision-making positions. So this highly contributes to income generation and to the independence of women, but also to the production of healthy food for the society as a whole. In the heart of this debate in Brazil and in Latin America, we have La Via Campesina, and we discuss the production of healthy food, not only as a policy that is targeted at the well-being of the peasantry, but of the whole society. The target is producing food for all, producing food that is healthy and that can benefit the whole society, stemming from the fact that the production needs to give good working conditions for the people working in the rural areas, and that also serves to produce healthy food under good environmental conditions, very different conditions from the ones used by the agribusiness model. In here, you can see the self-organization of women at the Rural Workers Landless Movement. What is the auto-organization or the self-organization? This is an achievement by women. It's important to clarify this. And this achievement is reflected throughout MST, throughout the movement, and this is stemmed from women. This is the result of a struggle carried out, undertaken by women. But this is a struggle for the benefit of the society. As a consequence, we have different forms of organization and production. As I mentioned, we have cooperatives, agro sectors, agro industries that are all part of the popular agrarian reform project. And we have several examples of production in the context of cooperatives that actually shows that agroecology production is capable of producing food in abundance, as opposed to what agribusiness usually say about family farming. And it also brings about benefits when it comes to collective production. And I'll go faster now. Okay, so the self-organization, as I mentioned, is a principle at the MST movement, and the cooperatives are part of a project of popular agrarian reform. As mentioned by Renata and also by Stedley, the popular agrarian reform is more than the achievement of land and the access to land. It is actually an agrarian reform under correct conditions for the entire population. So it means ensuring high quality production, access to natural resources, and access to healthy food, and the creation of different relations of production. Here you have some images, some photos of the results of this work. In 2019, we had the first national gathering of women at MST, and you have this banner where you can read planting healthy food. So this is central when it comes to our self-organization, and this gathering had the participation of more than 3,500 women from all over the country and Latin America.
And these are some of the examples of women organized production. I'll try to go faster now. Women historically have been leading organic gardens. This is a work that's many times invisible, like small livestock initiatives or small gardens. Sometimes they're in the backyard of the house. This is not very visible as production, but that reaches even public schools through policies or public purchasing of these products. This kind of policy has been completely destroyed by Bolsonaro administration. But this is an organic garden in the south of the country. So this is a collectively run garden organized by women. The products go to producers' markets, and this is also an instrument of the recognition of women's labor through a collective process that is not only generating income for the women, but also is allowing them to build their autonomy and to provide healthy food for the population. A different example of agro-industrial processing. Here they produce organic wheat pasta. This is in the south this is Paraná, the state of Paraná, but there's also initiatives like that in other states of the south. This is a different example of an initiative of food processing. They produce beer. This group of women produces beer, non-GMO beer, and they talk about the logic of their work, and they want to express that the women have always been responsible for the production of beer, showing that it is possible to produce without genetically modified crops and with feminist principles. And finally, this is the production of as camponesas. They produce gems, reserves, and they have increasing the frozen fruit products. They're men too, they participate, but it has always been led by the women. And it is important, I think, to highlight that that is not only an advancement for women in, in terms of their autonomy, but this is generating jobs and quality of life for the population. So this kind of achievement, the achievement of these organizations that I'm showing you, is about the economic autonomy of women, creating income and a better life quality for the family. And women, when they start to have their own income, that will also be distributed through the family. The creation of jobs inside the settlements, dignified jobs, that also reflects in the families staying in the rural areas. It's very important for them to have a possibility of having income, also young people, so they will not leave their villages and their regions and go to the cities. And that also is expressed in the production of healthy, agrochemical-free food that can be distributed through policies of public purchasing for the schools, for public schools. And this is where I want to wrap my...
Yeah, thank you very much, Maisa. And I would like to invite Professor Rogério to ask your questions, please.
Bom dia, boa noite, boa tarde a todos os colegas que nos ouvem aqui.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Good afternoon, Professor Jade and Professor Kichi. I would like to give congratulations to all the presentations. And I believe your presentations are connected to the cycle of debates we have been having, starting with João Pedro Stedley in the first session, then with me, Rosa Marques, and Professor Paulo Nakatani. And today, I believe that the presentations are pointing to a very important thing. Brazil is a business since the country has been colonized. Its main characteristic is to be seen as a business in the international scale. And today, the world, from my point of view, the world has many points of geopolitical tension, but I would like to highlight 3 places where this dispute is being fought. First, Taiwan. Second, the issue of Ukraine. And third, Brazil. Not by chance, the elections of last year were followed globally. So Brazil is a very important country for the international geopolitics. Brazil is a central country for the calculations of the profitability of international capital. And I have 3 questions that I'll have already been posting on the chat, and now I want to share them with you. To Camila, I'd like to ask, well, this week Joseph Stiglitz has talked about the Brazil interest rate. And he said that President Lula is right in trying to reduce the interest rates in Brazil. This is a debate that we have been witnessing here in Brazil, a debate between President Lula and the Brazilian Central Bank. And Brazil has the highest interest rate, real interest rate in the world, which is twice higher than the second country, Mexico, with 4.2%. So as you see, this dispute between the president and the central bank at the moment, how do you see it, Professor Camila? Renata, I'd like to thank you for a phrase that has been expressed what Brazil is like. Too much land without people there and too much people that are landless. That is a paradox that is very uh, that runs according to the logic of the capitalist relation that has been built in the country. That shows the relation between financial capital and the land issues in Brazil. That shows that the interests of the bank and the international conglomerates are aligned and supporting each other in the present context. Do you see any possibilities of an improval of the correlation of forces in face of the new administration that has just started? I would like also to address Maisa's presentation. She shows the increasingly visible importance of women's participation. As we know how sexist uh, uh, characteristics have been always important for the structure of Brazilian agricultural structure. Women were there, but their names were not even seen on the property titles of the land. Do you think, Maisa, there is a favorable condition of fighting sexism in agriculture, and how does that connect to other movements for the recognition of women's participation and presence? I would like again to give congratulations for your presentations. They were very precise. They presented very fundamental aspects of the Brazilian agricultural reality. So the floor back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rogerio. And please, Camila.
Ok, obrigada. Que legal, o Rogério está aqui com a gente.
That's great to have Rogério here with us. He has been our teacher, a very important reference for us in the economic department. So thank you very much. I believe that your question about the relation between the Brazilian Lula's administration and the central bank, this is very visible in their dispute over the interest rate. Not only about that, but here in Brazil, it's one of the few economies in the world where the interest rate is such a central element in the economy. In some economies, the interest rate is just one between many elements, but here in Brazil, it's very dominant in determining what is the economic scenario, because the interest rates will have important implications not only for economic policies but for social policies. Like recently in Dilma's administration and also the former administrations of President Lula, they have been launching public social policies trying to stimulate entrepreneurship through credit and trying to stimulate the Brazilian economy through the consumption of middle and lower classes, trying to stimulate the acquisition of the first of houses. All that depended on the conditions of the interest rate, because that was done through public banks offering people credit to buy their first house, for an entrepreneur to be able to open a small business. All that depended on the interest rate. On the other hand, there was a very important, a key element of the Brazilian interest rate is that a great part of the Brazilian economy is financed through public debt, attracting foreign capital. That depends on an attractive interest rate. This is many administrations have done that. That's how the Workers' Party administration were financing their policies. So this high interest rate was important, was key to that. And another key element to understand the high interest rate in Brazil is the trade-off between the interest rate and the exchange rate, how the exchange rate is connected to the interest rate. And that has implications for our international trade. How much do we export? How much do we get to have a positive trade balance? This is why the interest rate is so important, because it will have impact on people's real life and how do we structure our economic policy and how we structure our social policy. For very heterodox economists, when we come to the current debate of being dependent on the central bank or not, well, we come to a situation where the central bank, for a heterodox economist, must be an institution, an agency that goes along with the state decision making, that goes along with the policies that are being promoted by the current administrations. But we know that a great part of the capitalist economy, for a great part of the capitalist economies, that is not true. Many times the central banks are autonomous, independent agencies that will act according to the market and not according to the decisions of the public interest. So this is the central debate that is going on right now in the dispute between Lula and the president of the central bank. Because during the Bolsonaro administration, for instance, the central bank was independent from the government. So among the many functions of the central bank, between their many responsibilities, they have the responsibility of defining the interest rate. So considering the importance of the interest rate for our economy, today in Brazil, we have decided that there is this institution independent from the running administration is going to be defining that rate. So this is very complex because the conditions of the administration to create policies depends on that. So from the Marxist point of view, I think that the central bank has to be connected to the current administration, not to the market, because in a situation of crisis, they cannot operate as they wish.
Yeah, thank you, Camila. And Hanada?
Isso aí, né? Bom dia para quem é de bom dia, boa noite para quem é de boa noite, né? Bem lembrado, Rogério.
Good morning and good evening. Very good to have your presence here. And I thank you very much for your questions. All the questions are very important to this dialogue. And I believe we have our time is short, so our presentations have the purpose is to be provocative. This is the book that has been just launched by Expressão Popular editors, which is a synthesis of the many years of our studies in the collective dependency, agrarian issues, and changes in Latin America. So Expressão Popular Editing House has made that available to you. And finally, regarding the aspect of the agrarian issues within the financial globalizations, we see how much that is being made extreme during the Bolsonaro administration. They used to say that very openly, that they were opening the gates, that they were setting fire to the Amazon and all that. It was a very violent period for the people of the agrarian communities and the peoples of the forest. The Lula government had composed a broad front for democracy politically, so that broad front has brought in different sectors of the agribusiness and also popular movement, transnational companies. And we see that this front is really broad, but there is an understanding, a shared understanding that the process of a culture of violence, well, let's say essentially fascist characteristics of the former administration, was not the better way of doing things. So we had a victory because we were victorious in the ballot, and we also have beaten their project. But it was a very close result. We cannot deny the 58 million votes that Bolsonaro got, and how does that express in our country? You have many fascist groups rising in our country, in the state of Espírito Santo. We had shooting in shootings in schools in Aracruz, in Vila Velha, and that's also a result of that movement. And also in our parliament that is being expressed, because it's not only about the president who holds the tools for making decisions. We have a very important number of MPs that are from Bolsonaro's party, although the Workers' Party has also a very important expression there. But there is an increased polarization in the parliament and in society.
And this is part of the correlation of forces we have in Brazil currently. For us, the correlation of forces has changed. We no longer have a president who will call for the murder of landless people and give awards to policemen who kill landless people and make tributes to torture, so on and so forth. On the other hand, this model of composition is a model of dispute. So the way we see it, in order to advance in the agrarian reform and agroecology, we can see that the composition of the current administration, and we saw that during the transition phase, we see that the government composition will not grant us everything we are asking for. So it's time for us to take to the streets as well, to fight for our rights and for the development of public policy for agrarian reform and family farming. So this is a huge issue indeed. But I think that now we have a room so that we can take to the streets with our demands and flags, and you're not going to be killed for that. But yes, it's still under dispute, and here we are. I won't extend anymore, so I'd like to thank you again.
And Maísa, it's your turn. Yeah.
Primeiro, eu queria agradecer a pergunta
First of
do
all,
Rogério.
thank you, Rogério, for the question.
Segundo, dizer que a reforma agrária, né,
And I mean, you made an important question. The popular agrarian reform is a project that was built at the grassroots level. So this project comprises the reality of our country and the reality in the rural areas. As I mentioned, all achievements made by women, such as the collective groups, the self-organization, women having the right to have their names written on the certificate of property, this is all the result of a lot of struggle. So the popular agrarian reform is a project that takes into account all these struggles. The MST has almost 40 years of history, and the movement continues. And I hope it won't continue for many years to come, because the reason of the existence of the movement is the fight for an agrarian reform, and I hope that an agrarian reform takes place in Brazil. But yes, I think that the popular agrarian reform project is capable of fighting against macho men and all this macho ideology, because this program has been built by men and by women as well. So this project is not an isolated one. We are now talking about fights that include women from Via Campesina, women fighting for food sovereignty, women who fight for healthy food production, movements including all Latin America. You also have Margaridas, the movement of women peasantry, and other movements in rural areas such as small producers and etc. So the fight against this male sexism is part of this project, and a project where women look for more room to work and to fight, and it's all connected in this fight against male sexism. So I won't talk any further, and that's my answer. Thank you, Jade. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now it's around 11:10 p.m. in Beijing, and we have over 2,000 viewers. So thank you very much for your excellent presentations, and thank you very much. And I think tonight we have discussed about the problem of dependency, and also the effort of delinking, as Armin mentioned previously ago. And that means we have the power from people to do a lot of work to do the delinking. That means we concentrate the people's effort to have people-centered development. So and bring the benefits for the majority for at the grant level. So thank you very much for your presentation. And we will continue to organize the webinar about Brazil. The next webinar will be about the indigenous people. So thank you very much, and thank you. Bye-bye.